Our next guest is Odie Gene Cummings. I guess he's the oldest male member of the family left. I need to tell you a couple of things about him before we start. He's been a preacher since I can remember. So we left him last to give him time to do it, but we didn't want to give him absolutely last, so we're saving Doorbell in case we need to rebut anything that Odie Gene tells us. Odie Gene, would you tell us about our grandfather?
Well, Papa Roland was, like all of us that knew him, he was special. He was a gentleman, what I'd call a gentleman. He was not wishy-washy. What you saw was what you get. He stood tall, and he represented to me authority. But in that authority, he represented love and kindness and consideration. And to show you his human side, when I was 4 years old, he got me drunk, feeding me homemade wine. Papa Roland loved homemade wine.
What did Aunt Jewel think about that?
She liked to chose another dad. But he thought that was the funniest thing, to see a little 4-year-old boy that couldn't hit the ground with both feet. They'd go up in the air and I'd stumble around, and I remember it. And but I sat up in his lap to protect myself from my mother, and he protected me all the way home. So to me, he was a man that was respected in the community. I thought it was a tremendous thing that everybody called him boss. Well, he was sought for advice on when to plant, what to plant, and everything like that. And he loved his family. And I remember the day they came out to Doctor's Creek and told me that he had passed away. It was one of the darkest days of my life. Because I didn't know a lot about him at that time, but through the years I got to find out more by talking to Good Mama. My grandmother always called her Good Mama. That embarrassed your Aunt Jewel, my mother, because I called her mother-in-law Mean Mama. That didn't always go over too good. I had to quit that when I got old enough to understand that you just didn't do that. But throughout my life, I called Grandmother Roland and Grandmother Speaks. I called her Good Mama. And I called her that at her funeral. And I'm going to call her that when I get to heaven, because I know she's there. I had the privilege, after Granddaddy died, to spend some nights with her. You know, she never really expressed her emotion. All of you that know her know that she never, hardly ever, had any outward expression of love for anybody. She just didn't do that. She was an Indian in that respect, and she was very reserved in her own right. But in the darkness of the night, and in the hours of the day that we spent together, she could share her heart with me, and she did that all the days of her life, even when she came back to Pecan Gap. And when my wife and I came home to Pecan Gap, when I got out of the service, she had a little house, especially for us to move into, so we'd be next door to her. And I told her the last time I talked to her, when she understood what I was saying, that when she gets to heaven, she could keep a house right next door for me. And that's what I know about her. Don't know anything really about Granddad except that impression that he made on me as a small child. Good Mama told me that he was a kind of a refugee from England and a rebel against the Church of England. And that's one of the reasons that his family came to this country. And that's a foundation that was laid for us in the beliefs that we each one share here today.
You said he was tall. Do you have any idea how tall he was?
He was a little bit over 6 feet. My dad was 6 foot exactly. And he was just a little bit taller than Dad. And not as tall as my brother. My brother was 6'4". but he was a tall man, and he carried himself erect. Everywhere you saw him, he'd just stand out in a crowd.
Anything else you want to tell us about Boss Roland, or who you call Good Mama and I call Nanny Speaks? She had a lot of different names.
Yeah, I was impressed with her house in Cooper. You know, he was a farmer, a big farmer, and he had that house that had an indoor staircase. And I remember some of the gatherings that we had there, and I remember when Uncle Aubrey and his first wife were there. Supposed to tell the truth, Aunt Gladys was part of our family for a while, but she didn't want any children. And your dad, because he didn't know you at the time, he wanted some kids. And he didn't know all of you, but he might have changed his mind.
Yeah.
But he loved children. And I remember Aunt Gladys on that staircase. She was a beautiful lady. But she didn't have the kind of beauty that Ann had. She had a beauty that'll never die. I see that beauty reflected in her daughter, in her daughter's daughter, in these boys that they raised. He didn't pay me to say that.
No need to see.
Your parents were interesting characters too. Would you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, Dad was a farmer. Dad was a people person. Dad was my hero. And Mother, she was a typical school teacher back then. And she wanted her kids to make perfect grades. She wanted us to know how to spell every word. Papa Roland taught her to spell from the Bible, taught her pronunciation from the Bible, taught my dad the music, shape notes. You know, the cup, it'll hold so much. You hold that note as it spills out. That's the way the shape notes went back in those days in church. And Dad loved to sing. And we spent many hours going into Dallas to KGKO to hear the Stamps Quartet sing, and they were Dad's favorite. And he loved that. We spent hours in the Sportatorium in Dallas at singing conventions because of his love for music. Mother was a typical wife, not typical. She was a biblical wife. And she loved her husband, and her husband loved her. There was no outward display of affection in public, but they loved each other. Dad was an outdoorsman. He loved to be outside. He loved to farm. He loved his animals. He loved his mules. And he loved his children. He was a disciplinarian. And I've said many times in my lifetime that when Gillette invented the safety razor, they ruined this country because Dad had a razor strap. And it worked for things other than a razor. It worked on us boys. But Mother was, well, I don't know how you describe her. Mother was a loving person. She loved everybody. And she tried to do for everybody. And she was equally loving until we got a little girl that joined our family, and then she couldn't see us old boys. But anyway, that's why Beth's so rotten. But she'll rebut that. No, Beth had it made. She had 3 brothers, a dad and a mother to spoil her. And I've had the same experience in my life. I've had 5 girls to take care of me, my wife and 4 daughters. And there's not any better position that a man can have in life than to have that. And to have your children to love you and to be a part of it. My mother and dad loved their family. And they loved this boy. When I surrendered to preach, they would come miles just to hear me. And one mistake I made, and I'll tell them when I get to heaven, I would never allow him to join my church. So you join just for me. I want you to join where God wants you to be. But I should have given them the privilege, if that would have suited them, to have been a part of our church. But they were a part, even though we're not members. And, you know,